They're just some breathtaking examples of what I can only describe as abuse by hospitals and insurance companies of patients. Now, all of us as patients, we have strength that we didn't have before. We can make a hell of a lot of noise that wasn't possible a long, long time ago.
From Offscript Media, I am Matthew Zachary, and this is Out of Patience. On the show today, another fantastic Wayback Machine episode with Brian Loew, the CEO of Inspire. Brian is one of the early adopter pioneers of what we now call digital health, which has spawned the current spate of myriad online patient communities, each of whom creates safe spaces of support and ideally engenders the necessary life hackery to make whatever it is you're there for suck a little less. As someone who's currently doing nothing even related to what he studied in undergraduate, Brian and I commiserate on just how meaningful his BA and BS in physics and economics have come in just so handy these days. Listen in as Brian and I debate the semantic virtues, or lack thereof, in consumer protection versus patient-centric care. We also opine on the state of the state facing communities of color, how Inspire is addressing disparities, and my oh my, the abuse of patients by hospitals, healthcare systems, and the insurance industry happening in plain sight every day. So prepare yourself for some serious name dropping as we hop in our DeLorean and channel life before social media to give credit where credit is due to the original Our Gang of upstart rapscallions that comprise the Health 2.0 movement. Enjoy the show. Brian Loew, it's a Wayback Machine show.
Yay!
I hit the button, we're recording.
Okay, good. Great to be here. I'm really glad we're talking, and it's wonderful to hear your voice.
Yeah, you probably saw on my feed. I talked to Matt Holt. By the time this show broadcasts, the Matt Holt show will be up on my feed. I just talked the other day to Missy Krasner, just out of shits and giggles because she's awesome.
Terrific.
And I talked to Jane Saracen Khan and Susanna Fogg. I'm going back in time, and so I appreciate your telling me it was great to hear from me. But I've never really gone away. We've never gone away. My first question for you is, how the hell are we still here?
I know. It's been a really long time. It's been about 15 years, believe it or not, which blows my mind when we think about that.
What is that in digital health dog years?
Oh God, about 500. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I've said to someone, I don't know if it feels like a long time or a short time, because on different days it's both, in some ways it feels like the world has changed dramatically. In other ways it feels like sort of nothing has changed and we're still in the beginning. Yeah.
It's like the hamster wheel, right? It's just a hamster wheel.
Yeah, for sure.
Only now it's solar power too.
Right, with occasional bursts of inspiration.
It's a hybrid hamster wheel.
It's a hybrid hamster wheel. It's an electric hamster wheel.
I don't need to do a lot of digging on you because I've known you a long time, but I did find one particular thing that I just need the listeners to know. If you don't know about Brian Loew, he lists his high school on LinkedIn.
All right. Not fair. Okay.
You have to explain this to me. Why do you list your high school on? It does a lot of pride. Were you like the Pirates or the Panthers or something? What were you?
I don't want to be one of those people that goes all the way back and tells you about my high school sports or anything. I went to Thomas Jefferson Science and Tech, which, by the way, when I went there, it was kind of a place for misfit geeks interested in science. Today, it's become this incredibly competitive place that everyone knows about. But I don't even know if I could get in if I applied today. But at the time, it was for kids who were really interested in science. It was a low bar back then. Yeah, and my proudest achievement was my Westinghouse Science Fair project kind of thing. But that was a long time ago. I think I probably mentioned it when I first joined LinkedIn a long time ago. I should take it off now. I'm a little. Wait,
was that a baking soda and vinegar volcano like mine?
Oh, it was even more advanced. Yeah. We got pretty advanced. I will say that the Thomas Jefferson has the most extraordinary laboratories that I've ever seen in a high school and most universities. But it's a great place. But it's become now just so competitive that I think you have to be able to levitate to get in. So I don't know if I'd make it.
So in the continuing spirit of my digging on your LinkedIn, you have to talk to me about, well, in the life before the internet universe, you worked for a company called World Web.
Oh, no, I started it. Yeah,
You started,
that's right. Yeah.
So before you explain, I want to say my trigger when I heard that was the Simpsons episode where he started an internet company and it was called Compu Hyper Global Meganet.
Yeah, I started that company in 1993. I was straight out of school. I mean, the story there was I worked at Nature. My second job was at Nature, the science journal. And in sort of 1993, I took an issue of Nature Structural Biology, and two friends and I essentially created a website with this issue of Nature Structural Biology. And we showed it, and this was before there were really many websites at all. And we showed it to the president of Nature America, who looked at it, and this was like from 1993, and he said, yeah, I've heard about this web thing. We're not sure it's going to catch on. And so I left Nature and started a company because I think that's what you do, right? Because I said, I think there's a chance for Nature to be, we could get this domain name, nature.com, and it could be the center for science on the internet. And, I tried very hard. I couldn't persuade people that was a big deal. So I started an internet company that was called World Web, and we built websites. And then I went through the whole .com entrepreneurial roller coaster and almost went public. And it's a story that I'll tell you someday over many beers. But yeah, I've been an entrepreneur for forever.
So that BS and BA in physics and economics is coming very handy.
Oh, very, very handy. Yeah.
I've never heard
I was the kid who sold.
That's a crazy combination, like BA and BS. And how did that blend? What bouillabaisse comes of those two?
I mean, I was always interested in both, and then it reached a point where I really couldn't decide between them. And 4 years of school ended up being 5 years of school, and I got an undergrad degree in both. The thing I'll say is that physics made economics look easy. I really admire people I have incredible awe for people who go on to get a PhD in physics because I have a glimpse of how hard it is. But I guess I would say both subjects are examples of things that help you better understand the world, even if you don't, quote unquote, use them. I'm having the same conversations with my son now about math, saying, the sort of why should I learn calculus? Well, even if you don't use it, you definitely understand things more deeply. And so I feel like it was a good grounding in many ways.
I would contend that they're both highly consensus building practices as well.
Oh gosh, yeah, and I hate that part of it in some ways because a lot of the best innovation comes from areas where there's not consensus, right? Or where you have to reject consensus to build something great.
So how many times have you disputed people that say that's not what theory means?
Right. No, that's right. Or if you think about starting a company, all the people that you just mentioned, many of us in the kind of health space or health entrepreneurial space have had to do so when everyone called us crazy. I mean, it was true for Inspire, the company. It was true for, I think, all the other people that you've kind of mentioned, right? Jane Sorensen Khan and all the early people were people who said, like, no, this is not the way it should be. I reject consensus. This needs to change.
All right, so let's talk about this. I feel like there's a gap here in your resume between like the .com explosion and the start of Inspire.
This feels like a medical exam. You're really going deep here.
I'm putting my gloves on, bro.
All right.
So where were you? What was the post 9/11 pre-Bush first term? Like, what were you doing in health, and how did you come to that reconciliation of Jesus? If I don't do this, it won't get done with our rapscallion crowd at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sold worldweb.net after the .com roller coaster that I'll tell you someday on a second show about masochism, and then I had a board member who was the former president of the Washington Post company, and he said, hey, I think there's some interest in you going to the Washington Post to do technology strategy. So I had this kind of role that didn't exist before that. And it was just at the time that WashingtonPost.com was emerging, and there were incredible political fights between the website and the newspaper. You have to imagine the time when the newspaper was at its absolute peak. So this was the year 2000, when its revenues were probably, for the old print version, were probably the highest they've ever been. And then here was the website that was, strongly emerging. So I joined sort of at that moment. It was kind of an amazing 3 years. Essentially, there were extraordinary people there, and I made great friends and did really interesting things. But it was a company with 4,000 people, and I think I felt I just couldn't handle that much bureaucracy. I had ideas that I wanted to crank out over a weekend, and I could find sort of some fellow people who wanted to do it with me, but there was just too much friction in getting anything done. And by the way, that's not about the Washington Post. That's true of probably most large companies.
Most people don't remember the fraughtness between the digital version and the print version of
That's
media
right.
when they were strifing in the streets, pretty much like in Anchorman 2 when all the news crews were fighting in the streets at the same time with their you threw a trident. You threw a trident.
Oh, that's right. And I remember vividly one argument which kind of carries over into the medical space that we're talking about, which is I was in a meeting once with really senior editors at the Washington Post, and one of them was literally pounding a table saying, "We will not allow our readers to comment on our stories." Which now you can't even imagine that concept, right? But this was a time when a writer who, by the way, if you were a writer at the Washington Post, you were a rock star. You were one of the best writers in the world, right? A writer would write a story and that was it. And maybe you'd write a letter to the editor if you really felt strongly about it. But if you look at the New York Times or the Washington Post today, you have incredible responses from readers. And of course, that's the norm now, right? Similarly, if you looked at the health space back then, the idea that you could give feedback to your doctor, let alone question or challenge your doctor, was anathema. That didn't happen. I mean, the world has really changed a lot in 20 years.
So solve all of the problems of the world in one word.
Oh my gosh.
Those are 3 words.
Yeah, not the whole world, but I think for health and this, I've been listening to your other podcasts. The hill that I will die on will be patient at the center, or patient centricity. If we can really think of the patient being at the center of everything in health and really behave that way, then we'll have succeeded, I think.
Let me float an idea into your head, because this has been ruminating in my mind since I left Stupid Cancer, and it kind of flips the way we think about what we do as our end user is the patient. But if we're talking about a person, an American citizen, and something bad happens to that person and they go into a supply-only economy, is this really more about protecting them to make sure that they have awareness of choice and navigation? Are we looking more of a consumer protection philosophy or dogmatic principle than looking at it as patient-centered care?
I think so many things are done in the name of protection that are not protective at all. There are so many times when there's kind of the, don't worry your pretty little head about that. I've got the right answers. I think oftentimes, what I hear from most patient activists is kind of like, we don't need your stinking protection. Now, obviously some people do need different kinds of protection, but that's a horrible mindset to be in. It leads to all sorts of bad things in medicine when the idea is, we're not going to tell you everything. We're just going to give you a fraction of the information. We're going to protect you. I think that's a bad mindset to start with.
I can't think of any analog other than something that really is apples to apples, or apples to oranges, or apples to ugly fruit or whatever, which is how Ralph Nader in the 60s forced the hand of the insurance companies to pay for seatbelts because they didn't want to pay out claims data. And he was like America's public advocate for safety, right? So is there an analog to that today that exists?
If you look at the health insurance, I've had a couple of personal experiences with hospitals and with insurance companies that make me feel sort of absolutely miserable. And I know that I'm not alone, because there's a huge amount, in Inspire, we have, millions of members and, 1.5 billion words that they've written. And I know that it's a constant topic of conversation. It's one of these subjects that if you just go along quietly and pay your increasing insurance bills and follow all the instructions, you don't feel the full pain of it all. But if you, heaven forbid, if you challenge or ask a question or try to find out what a procedure costs, or ask why your CT scan was $9,000 on Tuesday and $15,000 on Wednesday, you get depressed really, really quickly. Either you get depressed or angry, or both. And I know it's not necessarily the topic of this, but I feel like maybe we should have a part 2 talking about affordability and access to care. There's an incredible, I forget the name of the writer, but there's an incredible series of stories in the New York Times right now about where the writer asked patients to submit their hospital bills during COVID, or during coronavirus, in the time of coronavirus. There are just some breathtaking examples of what I can only describe as abuse by hospitals and insurance companies of patients. And I think there's a way out of it, which is now all of us as patients, we have strength that we didn't have before. We can come together and make a hell of a lot of noise that wasn't possible a long, long time ago. If you go back to what Nader was doing, was sort of exposing this problem that had to be solved. We're now in a position to do that. Maybe Nader would be an amplifier, but frankly, we can build the voice ourselves with, millions of patients who now suddenly are able to come together and make their point loudly.
back with our guest after the break.
Has your chronic illness made it difficult to continue working in the traditional way? Want to learn how to find and create flexible remote work that both accommodates your chronic illness and generates an income? Join the Patients Getting Paid membership, a community of chronicpreneurs where people just like you find workshops and trainings, weekly updated condition-specific gigs, twice monthly coaching calls, co-workings, accountability, and the kindest community to support you on your path to make money while working from anywhere and taking good care of yourself. Learn more or join us at patientsgettingpaid.com.
So let's talk about our origin story, and I would say like the gangly group of Margaret Mead people that convened in 2005 or 6, and we're figuring out what the hell we're going to do together. And you know, some of us are still here. We're going to name a lot of names on the show because I feel like we're all mishpach. We're all kind of still above the tulips, as my dad would say, and we're still just as kind of disenfranchised. But yet, where can we point to progress? What went through your mind in terms of I'm going to start this?
So the idea was, going briefly back to the Washington Post, I was fortunate enough to get to know the guy who was running, his name was Ralph Turkowitz. He was running the venture groups, the investments for the Washington Post. And he had this idea. He took me along to a lot of the meetings to help due diligence on all these tech companies that the Post would consider investing in. And at the time, the Post wanted to invest in a social network. So we looked at every conceivable social network you can imagine, you know, sports, dating, everything in the world. And as we looked at probably 40 early social networks, my wife was involved in for pharma.org, Pharmaceutical Association, but she was head of science and regulatory affairs. And I met all of these heads in R&D at companies with infinite money, right? Pharma companies with multi-billion-dollar R&D budgets. And all of them talked about the same problem. They said, recruiting for clinical trials is slow and all sorts of other stuff. And so these two things going on, I was learning about social networks and I was learning about this problem in recruiting. And so I think, like so many businesses, I thought, well, I don't know what's impossible, so I'll just completely disrupt the clinical trial recruitment, right? I'll get a couple of friends together and we'll blow up this $40 billion a year problem, right? I mean, it was incredibly naive. I had no right to be doing this, right? So what I thought was, let's build a social network of patients organized by disease area and invite them to join clinical trial problems. You'll solve the agency problem, you'll solve all sorts of things. So that was the idea, right? And it was literally just, here's a great idea. I approached some of the angel investors who had invested in my first company and raised a seed round, got some friends together, built a prototype, and then was audacious enough to reach out to all of these patient advocacy organizations, which was wonderful. It was an idea that came from this friend who said, I can introduce you to a bunch of patient advocacy groups. Why don't you go talk to them and build their communities? This woman is named Valerie Volpe. She's wonderful. And one of the first people she introduced me to was Kathy Russell, who was at the Children's Inn at the NIH, which for your listeners who may know that the Children's Inn at the NIH is where children with cancer and rare disease go. It's a beautiful place where their families can stay with them while they're under treatment in clinical trials at the NIH. And Kathy Russell she's extraordinary. She listened to what we said. She said, I understand you've never done this before, but let's go for it. And so they were our first partner. We went through extraordinary medical and legal review with the NIH. We used that to build our privacy policy and terms of use. And then we were off and running. We then continued to sign up these patient advocacy groups. So early ones like Women Heart and Ovarian Cancer National Alliance and et cetera, Osteoporosis Foundation. And we just grew and grew and grew from there. And then, you know, like so many stories, we found ourselves at the Health 2.0 conference, right? Which I think you've referred to, where were you playing the piano there?
Yeah. There? Matt, John, and Indu like somehow found me through Missy at Google and like, wow, you should come be our, I mean, we joked today about like tokenism and patient advocacy. I was kind of the only cancer guy there, but I wasn't there to like be the monkey grinder kid on the stage. I was just like enjoying playing piano and learning because I was in full recon mode. I was part with Livestrong. I was part with some policy groups in the Hill. And I'm like, what is all this then too? And it was just exciting to meet, you know, version 1.0. He called it Health 2. It was like human 1.0.
Right. There was something going on there that in hindsight is kind of extraordinary, which was that you very loudly were saying like, I had cancer, right? And there were other people there. I don't know if they were there or they were at subsequent meetings, but it wasn't just Matt Holt and Indu. You had Jamie and Ben Haywood talking about their brother. You had Jane Sorensen Khan. You had, some of the other people I think about, right? Susanna Fox, who was very loudly talking about a lot of the ideas that it was almost like prescient, sort of the ideas that would become important later. I think of Carrie Sparling and Amy Tenderich and type 1 diabetes, which is an area I care a lot about, who were essentially saying like, I am a patient, right? I have this disease. Let me tell you about it. And people like e-patient Dave, who are incredibly open about their personal health journey. And if you think about our parents' generation, let alone probably when we were little kids, like you didn't talk about these things. No one talked about their cancer, right? My mother told me that, people would have a heart attack and it was just sort of expected. And then it was this quiet thing that no one ever talked about. I think it was the first time in my life where I'd been at a place where people were just openly talking about their personal health, like ever. It was incredible.
Well, I mean, bro, I was diagnosed in 96. It was still like a whisper thing. Matt's got the cancer,
Right. That's what I mean. And I think you were most vividly the person who was out there saying like, yeah, I had it. What do you want to know? I'll talk to you for an hour about my cancer, which I'd never met anyone in my life like that. And then here we're all together and we were all talking loudly about it. And I think that in a lot of ways, it was that mindset which caused the revolution. It wasn't just the technology. It was the fact that suddenly people were okay talking about this. And then as they began to, there was a chorus of voices that joined in and you suddenly felt like, I'm not alone. I can talk about all of these things openly.
So let me go back to two words that may or may not go together. I know we changed terms for sake of sensitivities. This may or not be one of them, but social network. So when I hear those words, I still think of the movie. I still think of the movie with Jesse Eisenberg, like and Justin Timberlake, right? I hear social network and I have like a negative reaction to it because we're from the era where that word has now gotten so poisoned in certain circles.
Right.
And is it more relevant to reconsider it as a, Susanna would say, a peer-to-peer community or, wisdom of crowd? Do we need jargon? But, what is it these days that's driving consumers who happen to be patients to convene and learn?
Right. There's a really important distinction that I can now say clearly. It took a while to sort of figure this out. Think of social networks as horizontal, meaning people who are in there don't necessarily have a subject in common, an issue in common, versus you used to think of these as niche social networks. A much better word for them is communities, right? Whether it's a community of ovarian cancer or it's a community of saltwater fish, right? Or it's a community of, stamp collectors. The thing is that all these people have something in common. We see this incredibly vividly in our rare disease communities where you might be one of 5,000 people in the world with a rare disease, but you're in a community now with thousands of those people and you suddenly feel like everyone understands what you're going through. So instead of calling those social networks, let's call things like Inspire, let's call them communities or niche social networks. But they're the opposite of Twitter or Facebook, or where really you don't necessarily have a specific thing in common, right? You're just on the same platform. Does that make sense?
I feel like, one can overuse the word tribe and tribalism.
Yeah, it's a tribe. These are tribes. Yeah, no, it's a good word. These are tribes rather than
cults. Not cults. Definitely not cults.
No, that's right. That's right. No. In fact, there's a lot of diversity of thought inside these communities, and I guess tribe might be edging towards that. We're not talking about thinking the same way. We're talking about having a very specific thing in common, and then all the diversity that can come from that.
Yeah, not CBS Survivor kind of tribe.
That's right.
So let's dig into something really sensitive and really extra relevant these days. I talk about the ebb tide of progress, reveals things that then become your next progress to achieve.
Sure.
You have millions of patients on your platform. It's been very successful. You're still here. And there's an endless need for this type of service writ large throughout healthcare, whether it is something crazy bad like cancer or something crazy not so bad or bad-ish like a rare disease. How have you adapted to the disparity conversations? Because I look at this as it's not about the platform, it's about the messenger and the delivery of the content and communication from that messenger.
In a lot of ways, I think of Inspire as a peaceable kingdom where we set up a safe space and 90% of the value is created by the patients and caregivers who join it. If we're doing a very, very good job, we are essentially quietly in the background, moderating, making sure that this is safe from, that your data are safe, that there's not spam or viruses or really toxic behavior. But then if you just watch the flowers bloom, right, the members themselves are creating all the value. There are a lot of things that we sort of do quietly behind the scenes to ensure that everyone is taken care of and protected. But if we do a really good job, we're almost invisible.
Do you find that there's been a difference in, I would say, the user practice on self-policing? Is it gotten better or worse?
Yeah, I think pure self-policing is not enough. So when we created Inspire, sort of in the very beginning, the closest thing to what we're describing now were message boards on Yahoo. And a lot of those just decayed into spam-ridden, bad behavior, bully-driven, sites. And that's because, I'll give you a statistic. We ban about 1 out of every 5,000 members. It's a tiny, tiny number. But I feel like if you didn't ban those people, they could destroy the universe. It's incredible, the idea that occasionally there's someone who's such a bully that they drown out other voices and they make it uncomfortable for other people to speak.
Yeah, I think Jack Dorsey once said that 1% of the people make 95% of the noise.
I'm sure he's right. I'm sure he's right. And by the way, like, this is it's hard to know, Gilles Friedman, as you know, who started ACORE, way back when, and who was one of the very early guys like us. When I started Inspire, he said, let me give you some advice. Don't allow discussions of religion or politics on Inspire. And I said, why? And he gave me a whole lecture about how these would be incredibly hard. And we made the decision that, no, we would allow those discussions because I think it was Susanna Fox. It might have been someone else, but someone said to me, like, if you're a Southern Baptist, you're not going to have discussions about your health without talking about religion, right? So you'd immediately be drowning out those voices. And so we decided we're going to allow all this, but we're going to set up other rules. So we have rules that we enforce about bad behavior and bullying and stuff like that. And what we found is we have an incredibly talented team of human moderators at Inspire, and we've gotten sort of really good at doing that. But some of it was trial and error and learning what works. So I think, yeah, self-policing is good up to a point, but it's necessary but not sufficient.
So in terms of, like, the jargon is solving for access, right? How have you found any progress in working with the community cancer centers, which, we've been saying ad nauseum, 8 out of 10 people are diagnosed with cancer or dealing with chronic conditions or managing their health in the middle of nowhere. That's
right. And we know from looking at outcomes data that on average, the health outcomes are better for city than community cancer centers. Like, we know that. I feel like it's really interesting. So if you look at Inspire, in many ways, we have a self-selected population. These are people who have gone out of their way to seek a space, right? So if you look at our lung cancer community, these are people who are actively involved in their disease. Some fraction of them seek to become self-educated, to become citizen scientists, to become super educated. Others don't, right? I think what has changed perhaps is that we haven't solved the problem you're describing, but what has changed perhaps is that if you're motivated to learn about what's out there and what's possible, you now have the ability to do so. Whereas years and years ago, you would rely on your local cancer center, and it was almost impossible to get more information.
All right, you have 1 minute.
Okay.
Pitch my listeners. What are you doing? What's in it for them? What can they do?
We're doing something really cool right now. We've built the Inspire Research Accelerator. We get requests all the time from academics around the world who are trying to do research, extraordinarily talented, but they don't have access to the patients. This happens a lot in rare disease and in rare areas in cancer. So we announced at the Orphan Drug Congress a couple of weeks ago that we're now saying, if you're an academic or a nonprofit, we will invite Inspire members to participate in your research for free, no cost. We just want to accelerate and enable the scientific and medical research that you are doing. So I would say, if you're interested in that, check out inspire.com/accelerator, and we'd love to hear from you.
Brian Loew, Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology alumni, and the founder and CEO of Inspire. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
That's all for today, folks. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, follow us on social, and tell all your friends to listen. Out of Patience with Matthew Zachary is a product of Offscript Media. Our executive producer is Matthew Zachary. Our senior producers are Jen Horangeff and Andrew McDowell. Darren Tunn is our production intern. It is recorded, mixed, and edited by Matthew Zachary. Our theme music is by the Mike Van Allen Quintet and by Mara. For advertising and media inquiries, email media@offscript.com. Hit us up at contact@offscript.com to share comments, feedback, and make guest recommendations. For more information, visit offscript.com.